AMD just admitted defeat in some pretty key areas while calling it victory, which tells me that I think they're scared of Panther Lake. More on that in a second, but first you should check out Jawa.gg in this market, guys. The used market is going to be the way to go, and you want to be selling all of your old hardware to fund your upgrade. Jawa.gg can help you with both of those things. They have entirely pre-built custom PCs, which are able to be sorted with their Find the Perfect PC button. You can find the performance you want at specific resolutions in specific games, or you can sort for certain parts, your price range. You can even sort PCs by their theme to make sure it matches your room. And you can get individual parts, of course, as well. And again, the used market pricing is going to be a lot better than what you're finding new. And to fund your upgrade, you can sell. You've got two options. One is maximum convenience, where you sell your hardware directly to Jawa. You can get an instant offer for your GPU or your CPU, accept it, and turnaround time is extremely quick. However, you can also become a Jawa seller and set your own prices, create your own listings, and manage it that way. They've got you covered on both sides. Tons of great deals available, tons of great user reviews, huge Discord community, and best of all, I can save you $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10. Follow the sponsored link in the video description and or pinned comment, and a huge thank you to Jawa for sponsoring this part of today's video. Now, we have tons of other news topics to talk about today, and you can use the chapters in the timeline to find the parts you're most interested in, but I really want to talk about this because honestly, the new hardware that was announced for this year at CES was kind of not super exciting in the desktop PC space, but the mobile lineup from Intel's Panther Lake actually, from their claims, looks extremely promising, although a full third-party reviews aren't coming out for another 10 days. Now, AMD is trying to jump ahead of those reviews to claim victory, despite, while doing so, admitting some significant defeats in graphics performance in the mainstream segments. That seems like a pretty big deal to me. And the fact that they're trying to make this post at all to get ahead of the review cycle tells me they might be scared of what is to come. Because remember that AMD themselves really just announced basically the same mobile products they had last year with a few minor clock speed bumps here and there. That's about it. So where am I saying that they're claiming victory and admitting defeat? Well, this is a little bit of a hard to read chart, to be honest, but they're comparing which products stack up against each other, at least in AMD's opinion, in the lineup. And then they're also then saying how they expect the performance to go based on, the Intel chips aren't officially released. So there's a couple ways AMD could be getting this information. One option is that they're going off of what Intel has publicly released and then stacking up theirs up against that. And the other option is perhaps AMD somehow through, corporate spying or whatever actually has access to Intel's parts or benchmark data ahead of time. I have no idea how those things work behind the scenes at these big companies, but either way, their expected performance, they're claiming a win in gaming in the mainstream and in the mainstream segment, or at least similar performance as you go down to the bottom of the mainstream segment. However, in the AI segment, they're actually splitting things off based off of CPU, NPU, and graphics, where AMD generally claims victory in CPU performance and similar NPU performance. However, in graphics, in the mainstream and the thin and light segment, they're admitting defeat, which to me says that, well, wait a minute, doesn't that mean their gaming performance would actually be a loss when you're GPU limited? Now, it's possible that the AI workloads scale differently on the architectures compared to the gaming. It's a little hard to say how they're comparing it based on this chart that they're giving out here, but the only place where they're separating out the graphics performance, they're admitting defeat. So I think that's pretty significant. And in most gaming scenarios, you're GPU limited on these types of GPUs, not CPU limited. So I would call it a loss if you're outperformed on the GPU space. Now, AMD has some other slides here talking about how, the fastest AMD processor out there in the mobile space does have, they're claiming 37% faster graphics with their AI Max 395 Plus. But remember, that's their huge Strix Halo 40 compute unit part. Whereas Intel doesn't seem to be offering anything with that much die area dedicated to the GPU. Now, another thing that they're not getting into, which is my main issue with the APUs from AMD not getting an update here, is AMD is still relying on RDNA 3.5 GPU architecture, which means it does not support FSR 4. So in my opinion, AMD either needs to release a version of AI upscaling that does run on RDNA 3.5, which the proof of concept has already been leaked by AMD with an Int 8 version, although it's not super performant on RDNA 3. But the proof of concept is out there, whereas Intel's Panther Lake chips are offering the full AI-accelerated XMX version of the latest versions of XeSS AI upscaling and multi-frame generation, which AMD doesn't even have on its desktop GPUs. Now, I'm now less excited about frame generation, but the machine learning-based AI upscaling is a really big deal. In other words, if you can run the game at a lower internal rendering resolution, but get a better image quality output than AMD's upscaler provides, then you can actually make a huge inroads in any gaming performance loss that you might have had at native resolution. And when we're talking devices of this performance level, mobile chips, you're generally going to be relying on things like upscaling in order to improve your performance. So I think that's pretty significant. AMD has some other slides here that honestly just sound a little bit desperate. Like when comparing the processors, they're saying that they offer 2 times the processing threads. The number of threads is just a completely irrelevant metric to compare based on. What matters would be multi-threaded performance. And notice, they're not talking about multi-threaded performance. They're just saying we offer more threads. Again, it's not the same thing as saying how the performance stacks up, but it feels a little bit desperate to pull this metric out of all things to be something where you're claiming victory. It's kind of interesting. And they're saying that Intel's own data shows almost no advantage in power efficiency and battery life compared to Lunar Lake. However, Lunar Lake is Intel's own previous generation. They're not making any claim that AMD themselves actually have a win in battery life. Let me pull up, because in this slide that Intel released, Intel already claimed that against AMD's AI 365, that both the previous generation and their current generation use significantly less power, at least in these workloads here. So AMD doesn't seem to be making any sort of statement to countermand that claim. They're just saying, yeah, well, maybe Lunar Lake was already better, but this generation didn't push it that much further. That's certainly an interesting take. Anyway, so AMD is expecting major processing and graphic wins. Interesting. Okay. So again, maybe the reviews from third parties will come out and maybe AMD will actually have major victories in all of these cases. But it seems interesting to me that AMD is claiming a win while admitting defeat in key areas like graphics performance. And again, there's no sign of an AI upscaler available for their gaming. So honestly, from my perspective, I'm not that interested in the laptop space, but I am interested in the handheld space. I game on my Steam Deck quite a bit, and I've been itching to upgrade for something with a little bit more performance. And so the Strix Halo-based devices have been interesting. They're expensive, but 40 compute units, it's crazy. And the GPD Win 5 has now officially announced Bazzite OS support, and that'll be interesting because AMD does tend to have better Linux support than alternatives. But again, I've been hesitant to buy into this because of they haven't released an RDNA 4 based APU with FSR 4 support. So you kind of feel like you're buying into the tail end of a dying, breed of hardware stack. And so I don't know, it just doesn't feel good. And Intel's Panther Lake offering the full, XMX support with the latest versions of their upscaling has me interested to check out what Panther Lake actually does in the handheld space and maybe buy in there if that looks promising. Again, we do have to wait for the actual reviews to fully release. Now, again, AMD is pretty much just preparing refreshes with slightly higher CPU and GPU clocks for some of their lineup. More of those being rumored this time on their Max series with Gorgon Halo. But again, it's not a new technology stack, really. We're just looking at slight clock speed increases. In the desktop space, that's also all AMD really had to offer with the 9850X3D, and they are confirming its availability on January 29th, and they also are now confirming the price point. At least here, I've got to say at $499, I don't hate this because they're not charging some exorbitant premium for the small clock speed bump over the 9800X3D. The 9800X3D generally sells around $479 lately or so when I track it on sale. So if this really does come in at only a $20 premium, I don't hate it for the small clock speed bump. Now, it's just not super exciting, but also I don't really, how should I put this? I wonder what will happen on the open market. I hope that this does come in at this price and maybe even pushes down the price of the 9800X3D. But the other way this could go is sometimes the fastest processor will just come at a premium on the actual open market, regardless of what MSRP is set. So we'll have to say how it goes, but I do like this MSRP at least. Now, AMD has released a huge new AI bundle, which is an optional download for their graphics software. Now, some people have been asking, am I going to test this out on the channel? And I'm going to say no. I'm not interested in AI workloads, to be honest. I'm interested in gaming. And that's who this isn't for. This is not for gaming. So I don't hate that AMD is offering this. So AMD optimized AI products right there within their graphics software. I think that's a good thing. But I would certainly have preferred, FSR 4 support or some sort of AI upscaling support for RDNA 3 as a priority. But, maybe it's different teams of people working on those and not necessarily one over the other. But that's what I'd be interested in. Now, Intel has confirmed that their 12th gen core Alder Lake CPUs have entered a discontinuance period, which is bad news for anybody trying to build an old DDR4 based system but using the 12th gen processors or something like that, but reporting on that. By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description. I found this at videocards.com. Also at videocards.com, I saw that Forza Horizon 6 has been announced and will launch on May 19th with a PlayStation 5 version coming in 2026. And as soon as I saw this, I checked on Steam to see if there were system requirements. And there are, although it's only minimums and they don't really tell you anything about performance. The good news is, though, the minimum GPUs are pretty easy to get in here. A GTX 1650 or RX 6500 XT or Intel Arc A380 or Arc B390. That's not asking a whole heck of a lot, although is that, 720p 30 FPS or is that 1080p 60 FPS at low settings, right? We don't know. The processor is an Intel i5 8400 or AMD Ryzen 5 1600. So we don't know a lot yet, but thought I'd throw that out there at least. And also, Microsoft has announced that the Xbox app is now available on ARM-based Windows 11 PCs, and they claim 85%, actually more than 85%, of the Game Pass catalog is now compatible with these PCs. Now, compatible and running really well might not be the same thing, and I'm also interested in SteamOS offering some ARM compatibility now with their work they did to get the Steam Frame next-gen VR headset up and running, so I'm curious how that plays out. But in other news, we have Ubisoft has lost nearly 95% of its value in the last 8 years after the recent 34% share drop, which just happened due to its major reset announcement. Now, the big headlines here have been the cancellation of 6 games, including Prince of Persia: Sands of Time remake, but the others are not fully announced at this time. They were unannounced titles. Now, it reportedly includes an Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag remake, and there's been a huge amount of restructuring happening here at Ubisoft. Now, I don't know how much I want to get into this, but in general, they're talking about a whole just massive restructuring. First of all, they want to focus on exceptional quality games with two core pillars of strategy: open world adventures and games as a service native experiences, or as some people call their open world adventures, Ubislop. But they're hoping to deliver exceptional quality with them. And games as a service native experiences. So, in other words, the kinds of games I'm not personally that interested in, but can make lots of money. So I guess there's that. They've announced like significantly reducing the amount of work from home that's available. They're talking about closing down certain studios, but also they're announcing some things that I actually think might be a good thing, which is clarifying which studios are focused on which game brands. And then within that, having full like top to bottom authority over that game development. I think the idea there would be to reduce how many layers of management things have to go through, which I think could be a good thing. So that, again, I think there could be some positives here within all of the negatives. But remember what happened when, some former Ubisoft game devs formed their own studio to make a game they actually wanted to make, which, by the way, is not really open world and is not a games as a service. Well, it won the most awards of all time. So there's that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it made the most money of all time, but given the small development team that made the game, I'm sure they're considerably profitable. However, the best-selling game of 2025 appears to be Battlefield 6. I found this at WCCF Tech, but they seem to be getting the information from a Blue Sky post from Matt Piscatella, which is giving information from Circana Research. Now, it is important to note that they don't give, this doesn't include every single game. This is digital sales from places that actually offer that information. Not everyone makes that information available. So for example, when I don't see Clair Obscur Expedition 33 anywhere in the top 20 for the year, I think they just may be a developer that doesn't publish that information rather than they didn't make it to the top 20. Again, out of the games that are available on this list, we're seeing Battlefield 6 number 1, NBA 2K26 is number 2, Borderlands 4 is number 3, and it did pull ahead of Monster Hunter Wilds, which has stayed in the top 5 at number 4, with Call of Duty Black Ops 7 coming in at number 5. You can read through the rest of the list here yourself. But also, they did publish the information just for December. Now, in December, Call of Duty Black Ops 7 was number 1, and Battlefield 6 was number 3. So they're, within the lifespan of the games throughout the next year, it'll be interesting to follow and see whether Battlefield 6 does come out on top, or if Call of Duty will eventually take that lead. But it was nice to see having a real competitor to Call of Duty this year in that space. Now, this is a fun story. Maybe you could wish this could happen to you someday in the current market. A refunded RTX 5080 still arrives, and Amazon tells the buyer they can keep it. So this comes from somebody who had refunded their purchase of an RTX 5080 from Amazon because they found some available at Micro Center and decided to buy those anyway. However, the Amazon order still arrived, and the buyer says that they reached out to Amazon, but Amazon said keep it. It was their fault. They already processed the refund. So, hey, maybe miracles can happen. Now, that being said, there's a lot of bad news in the market as well, with Kioxia exec saying that this year's NAND is already sold out and that cheap 1 terabyte SSD bargains are over. So, that's kind of rough. Now, this is, of course, due to the AI data center situation, and they're saying that this year's NAND supply has sold out and it will continue until 2027. Kind of rough news there in the PC space. And I'll also leave you with this, which is that in the midst of all of this AI boom, there's also the intellectual property issues, because there's now a court filing that claims that Nvidia contacted Anna's archive for pirated books used in AI training. Now, there's some pretty, heavy evidence here that this was indeed the case, and I'm sure that Nvidia will get slapped with, something that to cap, into its multi-trillion-dollar market share or whatever it is now if they're found guilty of this. I'm certain of it, right, guys? Anyway, in other words, I think when businesses can make lots of money doing things and the penalties for doing so is probably nothing compared to the penalty of not keeping up with the other companies who are doing the same thing, then laws are just going to be broken. Again, this is allegedly, according to a court filing, not something that has been proven officially, and that is important to note. All of my sources will be linked in the video description, and remember to check out jawa.gg for great deals in the used market. Seriously, in this economy, the used market is the way to go, and selling to fund your upgrade is also the way to go. Check out that sponsored link in the video description and or pinned comment, and don't forget to use code OWEN10 for $10 off your first purchase. I hope all of you have an excellent day.